Okay, so welcome to Eat, Move, Think, the show about optimal wellness brought to you by Medcan.
Wow. Do it again.
Oh, I was practicing. Okay, ready?
Welcome
to Eat, Move, Think,
the show about
optimal
wellness brought to you by
Medcan.
Yeah, this is extremely good. Thank you.
Jazz, what do you have for us this week?
All right, this week we're staying on theme. Last week we focused on mental health and how individuals can help others, like dealing with mental health issues. Yep. This week is about mental health struggles. It's about mental health itself.
Writ large.
At large.
The macro phenomenon and the battle to improve it across Canada. There's been a lot of transformation in the way we think about mental health over the last, say, 20 years.
Just the ability to talk about it more, like the tips we heard last week. Using those tips is helping to reduce stigma and really change the way that all of society understands mental health.
Yeah, that change is really powerful, but it can only go so far without change to policy and laws.
And, some of us individuals are really taking those experiences beyond our inner circles and really encouraging the healthcare system to move that change forward.
I'm Chris.
I'm Jazz. We're the producers of Eat, Move, Think.
We have a very special episode today.
Yeah. Our guest today is Mary Deacon. She's the chair of Bell Let's Talk, and she's the founding president of the Center for Addiction and Mental Health Foundation. Let's Talk is the largest corporate mental health initiative in Canada, and CAMH is Canada's largest mental health and addiction hospital. So she is seriously an individual who's creating systemic change.
She's in conversation with Shaun Francis. He's Medcan's CEO and chair. He's also our host and the chair of the True Patriot Love Foundation.
This January 25th will be the 13th Bell Let's Talk Day, and since its beginnings in 2011, Let's Talk has committed nearly $140 million to Canadian mental health initiatives. It's funded more than 1,400 organizations, supported more than 5.5 million Canadians, and finally, a third of Canadians say that they've taken action related to mental health since Let's Talk began.
Mary and Shaun have worked together in the past to start the Bell Let's Talk Fund for military mental health in Canada. But we'll let them talk about that. They also talk about the way people and organizations can continue to promote mental health, what we can all do, what employers can do to continue this conversation and to change things so that we all think of mental health as something that is fixable and treatable.
Right, the way we think about a broken bone now.
So that we think about mental health in a way similar to the way we think about physical health.
Equally as important, if not more so.
Without further ado, here's our very special conversation between Shaun Francis and Mary Deacon.
Hi, it's Shaun Francis. I'm the host of Eat, Move, Think podcast and the chair and CEO of Medcan. And I'm delighted to welcome Mary Deacon today, who leads Bell's Let's Talk campaign going into their 13th year. Mary, it's so fantastic to see you. What our listeners ought to know is that we have a long history. When I founded True Patriot Love Foundation, which supports Canada's military families and veterans, mental health, has been and is a major concern for veterans and their families. And I was introduced to Mary and Bell, and they have become incredible supporters of True Patriot Love and have headlined our gala dinner for years and years and years, and many other activities, and have been great collaborators, not just helping generate more awareness for mental health in general, but very specifically for our veterans and military families. I can think of no one who's done more overall to bring the level of awareness to where you have. So thank you for that. And thank you for joining us today.
Thanks very much, Shaun. And it's really great to see you again and to continue our conversations. I have really fond memories of meeting you, learning about the work that you were envisioning, and so impressed with what you've accomplished. And in turn, I'd like to, thank and congratulate you for the role you've played in supporting our military men and women, including their mental health.
Thank you. Thanks, Mary. Great to have you. I know our time is limited, so I want to just talk to you about where we're at in the state of mental health in Canada. I know from my perspective, Medcan, for example, has never been busier. It seems like coming out of COVID, I'm not sure if this is your experience as well, but it's either a combination, either having a mental health professional is more accepted and or people need it more. What have you been finding in the last year or so?
Right. I would say it's a combination of the both. Prior to COVID, there was already a very, very significant gap between the services available and people's need, right? So there was already a very significant gap. Very hard for people to find access, to find somebody who is available in a reasonable time period, to find the right person, all of those things. With COVID, you had two things happening. One, there were more people experiencing signs of mental distress. So largely forms of anxiety. So you had more people struggling and you had more difficulty with access because of the rapid change that had to take place both within, the formal mental health system and then in the not-for-profit world for virtual services. It's fortunate that mental health is one of the kinds of healthcare that can effectively be delivered virtually, which may not be the case with all forms of healthcare. But really what it did was underscore the even growing divide between the need and the availability of services. So certainly I hear from Canadians all the time that we are experiencing a mental health crisis in Canada.
Are Americans dealing with the same phenomena?
No, because they have a different kind of healthcare system. In our healthcare system, the things that are funded through the provincial health plans are, in effect, hospital services and psychiatrists. However, the majority of mental health issues, certainly in the early stages, can effectively be supported through various kinds of talk therapy that could be provided by people who are not psychiatrists or in community settings with community mental health. Neither of those are part of the provincial healthcare systems in our country. So you have a real gap on the early intervention side for mental health in Canada. And it is absolutely true that for many, many people, the first formal interaction with the mental health system is when there is a crisis and they end up in an emergency department. It's either they end up in an emergency department or they end up in police custody. So, and that is not the place where a person, experiencing their first symptoms of some kind of mental distress should be getting the support. It's a total catch-22 because, the services that you get in a hospital setting and from a psychiatrist, which is a specialized discipline in medicine, are the most expensive mental health services that you can get. And yet it is very difficult to get access to the lower cost services that are very well suited for what might be considered early or less serious problems with mental health issues.
So they're effectively, they're not funded. And the people who may most need them, maybe unwilling to go, but certainly not willing to pay for it.
Yes. And again, it's part of the way our system has been funded. The way GPs are funded in many provinces in Canada is, for a very discrete period of time per patient. And often people with mental health issues who might present at their GP's office, they need more time, right? There's an element of talk therapy that is required that takes longer than the normal period of, very finite period of time that a doctor has to provide supports. So a doctor may often try and create a referral to a psychiatrist. If they're even able to get a referral to a psychiatrist, they're put at the end of a very long list of other people who are also waiting to see a psychiatrist. And that's absolutely antithetical to the nature of our healthcare system, where those specialized services delivered by neurologists, delivered by dermatologists, by cardiologists, by psychiatrists, are for the more serious, complex, issues that require that degree of specialization. But in the mental health system, there really is nothing before that that's covered by our provincial healthcare system. So yes, talk therapy will cost anywhere between perhaps $150 and $300 an hour. For many, many, many people, that's cost prohibitive, unless perhaps they have some coverage through their employer. But if they don't, where they're not employed or they don't have that kind of coverage through their employer, then every week they're going to be out of pocket that amount of money, and it simply can be prohibitive. Certainly, I am a big fan of efforts that are taking place in the not-for-profit world to find some way to have psychological counseling services, talk therapy services provided by, registered therapists to be included as part of our healthcare system. And that would alleviate a tremendous burden from the healthcare system, from the specialty psychiatrists, and actually save the system money. So not only are people going to get better and get the support they need when they need it early on, it will be more cost effective for the healthcare system.
I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, it's where we decide to spend money. I mean, certainly care and emergent care is paid for, but like you point out, I mean, how do you avoid not in the hospital on your back with a heart attack? And we invest, very little money in that. And you also look at societal issues. We have addiction and homelessness. And, I'm not sure chicken and the egg, like what comes first? Is somebody having mental health issues and then self-medicating? And then at some point, there's certainly a large portion of those people who are homeless and or having accidental overdoses have debilitating addiction and mental health issues.
Yeah, it's very hard to sort of tease them apart. And I don't think there's any sort of real black or white situation. Certainly, the research shows that many, many, many people who are homeless have or are experiencing either significant mental health issues or addiction issues. So, it's very complicated. And, 50% of the people with a mental health issue will have a co-occurring addiction issue and vice versa. So they're very closely tied together, and it makes treatment complex, or can make treatment complex. And that is why early identification, early treatment is so important, so that the issues are able to be dealt with earlier on before they, manifest themselves with people perhaps self-medicating or developing greater symptoms and becoming more ill.
And you probably know the answer to this. I'm aware of some very effective inpatient programs, but they seem to be mostly private funded. So affluent families and or people with very healthy benefit packages can afford inpatient mental health treatment. To what degree is that person on the street who has a mental health condition and or an addiction, like, are we funding them programmatically to get the kind of treatment we might make available to injured veterans, for example, or executives, or are they on their own?
Well, often they are on their own for a variety of reasons. One is that perhaps in being homeless, they don't have an address. So it's very hard to get benefits, that very hard to, have a health card, very hard for people to get access to the kind of services that come with having a home, right? Having an address where you can then apply for a health card and you can get these other things. So certainly no, it's another example of the haves and the have-nots in our society. I do feel that the not-for-profit mental health community is very, very good at focusing efforts on providing supports and services for some of the most marginalized people in our community dealing with mental health and addiction issues. And these are organizations, that are on the front line dealing with homeless people, with people in crisis, with people who aren't able to get access to consistent, let's say, psychiatric support, who may have related issues around homelessness. Homelessness and mental health issues often go hand in hand. If you don't have a home, it's very hard to think about other aspects of life if you don't know where you're going to sleep tonight. So we do have wonderful not-for-profit organizations in Canada who are playing a role in filling the gap, but it isn't the solution to the problem. And certainly everyone I speak to in the mental health community feels that our mental health system needs to be more fully integrated into our universal healthcare system. Mental health is a health issue. And, the better we're able to integrate mental health in the continuum of health services in our country and have them properly funded on the early intervention side, so that there is less need for the more costly, time-intensive services that are on the far end of the spectrum, the better off we will all be as a society.
Yeah, it's been popular, recently to talk about national pharmacare and dental care, but we don't talk about, debilitating mental health issues that are simply not funded. Yeah, certainly having better dental care is a nice to have. And there are links between dental care and other diseases, but it's nowhere near as debilitating as some of these mental health issues. And yet, I feel like it doesn't even get talked about, even though mental health overall is more accepted and people understand it and are more willing to talk about it. It doesn't seem to resonate politically.
Yeah, I feel that a really good solution to one of the problems, it's a complex issue, right? And there's many kinds of mental health and addiction issues, and they manifest themselves in different ways, and there's different degrees of severity. So it's not like I have a toothache. It's much more complicated than what might be required to solve the problem of a person presenting with a toothache, right? So it's a complex issue. I do believe that a national psychological counseling care as part of our funded system would go a long way. And, as to the issue of its importance in the public domain or in the political sphere, I would say that in the last decade or so, there is far more awareness about, more conversation about mental health and mental illness and its links with overall health. And, I think we're heading in the right direction. I was pleased to see during COVID that, alongside governments funding more in the area of obviously dealing specifically with the implications of the pandemic on physical health and our healthcare system, we did see a lot of investments by our governments in virtual mental health services. And that's a good thing. So I don't know, would we have seen that 25 or 30 years ago? The recognition of the importance of mental health as part of health in dealing with a pandemic? I do not know. It's kind of an academic question, but I would say it's a step in the right direction. But I do feel that much more needs to be done. I believe that it's really about a system, the mental health system, that really was never a fully formed system, in part because of stigma, in part because people for so many, many decades believed that mental health was not a health issue, but a moral issue, all the stigma surrounding it. There really was never a very comprehensive mental health system focusing on the early intervention and treatment. And the fact is that the majority of mental illnesses, which are depression and anxiety, make the bulk of mental illnesses, the majority of mental health issues, if you receive the appropriate care at the appropriate time, you will recover and lead a full, happy, productive life. So the early intervention and treatment is essential for us to create the kind of mental health care system that I believe we need to have in Canada.
Mary, you talked about this evolution over the past decade. I know we're going into the 13th Bell Let's Talk Day. Why don't you share with our listeners, how did you end up here as this prominent advocate for mental health? What was the instigation, the background?
So my interest in mental health started a very, very long time ago. And I would take us back to 1991. My first child was born on August 8th, 1991. And my youngest brother, at the age of 25, a medical student at the University of Toronto, died by suicide on August 23rd. It changed my life. It changed the life of my family. We had to come to terms with something that was completely unknown to us as a family. And in addition to dealing with all the shock and the trauma and the tragedy of the loss of his life, his name was David. A number of years later, in 2003, my brother Ted, who experienced quite severe obsessive compulsive disorder, also died by suicide. And the combination of those two events truly transformed the trajectory of my life. After David died, I took a position at the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health, which is Canada's largest teaching hospital, to create the CAMH Foundation, which is now a powerhouse foundation raising money for mental health in Canada. And I worked there for 10 years to really try and build up philanthropy in support of mental health. Made some progress, I think some significant progress, and that progress has continued today. But the experience of the loss of my brothers truly ended up creating the purpose for my life. Mental health became my life's work. And I was asked by George Cope, who was then the president of Bell back in 2010, to come to Bell to create what we now know of as Bell Let's Talk. And it was a tremendous opportunity to really take the issue of mental health and what was needed in mental health on a national stage. I've never looked back. We've made a lot of progress together with many organizations in the mental health community and other corporations and others who have really joined in a big way in terms of workplace mental health, for example. The work that TPL does in supporting military men and women and their families as it relates to mental health issues is a perfect example of an organization recognizing the importance of mental health along with physical health as part of that journey in the case of military men and women that transition to civilian life. So that's just one example of how so many organizations have really embraced mental health as part of their mandates and understand the connection between physical and mental health. The work is not done. A lot more still needs to be done, but I can honestly say that when we had our first Bell Let's Talk Day in 2011, I really had no idea that we would still be here today. But what I did know, absolutely, that mental health was an issue whose time had come. And with the right support, with the right resources, the fact that Bell is a communications company, throwing the weight of the Bell brand and its communication assets behind this issue created a tremendous opportunity for us to really put a spotlight on mental health and the work of mental health organizations so that we can hopefully create a Canada where everyone can get the mental health support they need.
I want to congratulate you, Mary and Bell, for everything you've done. You've had tremendous impact, but you also want to go back because one of the stats I've been briefed on is that 200 Canadians will attempt suicide every day. 12 will die. And I know just in what I deal with veterans that I think certainly more have died by suicide than died in Afghanistan. Is it getting better or worse? Would your younger brother, who ironically was in medical school, so in theory had access to resources, is there anything different today than might have been the case 30 years ago?
Well, I think there are several things. One, I think there has been progress made when it comes to stigma. In the case of my brother David, and I've heard this with other people, there was a degree of shame they felt. It's called self-stigma, feeling like it's not that they have an illness, but that it's somehow some kind of moral failing or a weakness. And if only they were stronger or worked harder or something, that they wouldn't be feeling the way they are. So I think there's a far greater understanding that, stigma plays a role in keeping people from getting help, and that it's okay to talk about mental health and it's okay to get help, and that with help you can get better. So I think the narrative is much better, and perhaps David would have felt more comfortable seeking help, more comfortable letting people in his world know about his struggles, leaning on them and seeking support and guidance from people he knew he could trust. Maybe that would have made a difference. Maybe the medical school might have had a different approach to understanding and being aware of issues that might affect their students. Maybe they would have better programs, more accessible services to support somebody who may be struggling who's in medical school. Maybe that would have made a difference. It's hard to know. I certainly feel very strongly that we have made progress in some of those areas, but until there are no suicides as a result of mental health issues, I don't think I will be happy, because I know for myself, and I know from so many people that I talk to and have talked to over the years, there's nothing more devastating than losing a child in that way. And, it's never easy to lose a child. There's no good way to lose a child. But, with a death of a child by suicide, there's so many other factors around guilt, feeling that you could have done something, perhaps not getting the support you would from your circle of friends as a result of the cause of death. I remember for my mom and dad, friends, family were uncomfortable. And, we Canadians are also polite, right? For fear of saying the wrong thing, we'll often say nothing, right? So often people who are experiencing these kind of tragedies do not get the same kind of, warm hug and support that they would get if they had lost a child through another means. So, there is a lot of progress. I am optimistic that we are heading in the right direction. Would things have been different? Well, that's something I think about all the time. When it comes to my brothers, I like to think it would have been different.
For our listeners, often you're caught by surprise when somebody does commit suicide. And you talked about the parents and how devastating that must be. Are there signs, like there's the cliche, of course, they were depressed and that you're not surprised, but many times you are very surprised. Are there signs, any indications that we should be looking for in a friend or a family member?
So certainly there can be signs that somebody is struggling. Often, the best thing to do is, first of all, to have the kind of relationship with, whether it's your child, your sibling, your parent, where you do have an open, trusting relationship. So hopefully, if they are struggling in any way, they will let you know, and you will let them know that you are there to support them. But that, I would say that the single best indicator that perhaps something is wrong, and it may be hard to know exactly what is wrong, is when there are significant changes in routines and behaviors. Somebody who's usually cheerful becomes uncheerful. Somebody who's talkative stops talking. Somebody who's a morning person can't get out of bed. Somebody who is a high performer at work becomes a low performer at work. Those kinds of things. Somebody who isn't a drinker becomes a big drinker, right? So things that are significantly noticeable changes in what is normal in the person's behavior. And that is typically a good sign that it's time for some conversation, and let that person know that you love them, you care about them. And if there's something that is, bothering them, that you're there to listen non-judgmentally and be there to support them.
Excellent advice. So Mary, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today. Thank you for your service to mental health and to making it something, literally that we can talk about and become more informed, and for being an advocate of the sector.
Well, thank you, Shaun. And both, I'm a proud customer of Medcan and a big fan of the services, but also, I first met you through your work with the True Patriot Love Foundation. And I remember very clearly the first time meeting you, hearing about your vision and your plans. And I knew right then that you were going to create a game-changing organization to support our military men and women and vets as they transitioned, back to civilian life. And I have to say, it's been a real pleasure to see the progress over the years and to work very closely with you and the team at TPL. It's one of the great pleasures of my work that I get to work with passionate people. And I would certainly consider you to be one of them, as well as the team at TPL. So it's really great to have a chance to talk with you today.
Likewise. Thank you, Mary.
That was Medcan CEO and our host, Shaun Francis, in conversation with Bell Let's Talk Chair, Mary Deacon.
We'll post episode highlights and links you can visit on our website, eatmovethinkpodcast.com. Follow Medcan on Twitter and Instagram at MedcanLiveWell. Learn more about Bell Let's Talk and find mental health resources at letstalk.bell.ca. support.bell.ca.
If you need mental health support, there are lots of resources out there that can help you. If you're dealing with an emergency, you should call 911. You can also reach out to Crisis Services Canada. They have a 24/7 toll-free number, 1-833-456-4566.
To book a consultation with someone from Medcan's mental well-being team, contact Mental Wellbeing at medcan.com.
Say hello and send us a tip or a suggestion for another episode by emailing us at info@eatmovethinkpodcast.com.
Okay, the credits now.
Eat Move Think is produced by Ghost Bureau.
Jasmine Ratch is managing producer.
Here I am. Social media and strategy support.
What is that?
What?
Social media and strategy support. What is
We need support for our strategy on this podcast. Oh, no.
the people who actually press the button to send. Anyway, that's Chantal Gertan, Andrew Imax, and Emily Bozick.
We do have some amazing social hits, so check them out on Instagram and Twitter. And executive producer is this guy, Christopher Shulgin.
Hi. We'll be back soon with a new episode examining the latest in health and wellness.
This podcast is intended to provide general information about health and wellness only and is not designed or intended to constitute or be used as a substitute for medical advice, treatment, or diagnosis. You should always talk to your Medcan healthcare provider for individual medical advice, diagnosis, and treatment, including your specific health and wellness needs. This podcast is based on the information available at the time of preparation and is only accurate and current as of that date. Source information and recommendations are subject to change based on scientific evidence as it evolves over time. Medcan is not responsible for future changes or updates to the information and recommendations and assumes no obligation to update based on future developments. Reference to or mention of specific treatments or therapies does not constitute or imply a recommendation or endorsement. The links provided within the associated document are to assist the reader with the specific information highlighted. Any third-party links are not endorsed by Medcan.